Hey, what is going on, Los Angeles? It's J. T. And today is Wednesday, November 5th, 2025. And on this installment of JT the LA Storyteller podcast, yours truly is coming to you, of course, from the city of Los Angeles and the greater state of California, where voters just passed Proposition 50 or Prop 50, put together by Governor Gavin Newsom and the state Democratic Party in order to gerrymander California's districts at the U.S. House of Representatives in favor of more Democrats over Republicans from 2026 through 2030, of course, and in response, of course, to Donald Trump and Greg Abbott gerrymandering the state of Texas in favor of Republicans over Democrats there. It all basically started then because Donald Trump figured that he would prefer to maintain his slim majority in the U.S. House of Reps, and there was probably no one better to tap than Greg Abbott's Texas, since it is the second largest state, just after California, in terms of the number of representatives they can send to the U.S. House of Reps. And so here came this response by Gavin Newsom and the Democratic Party here saying, hey, if you're going to play that game, we can too. And it certainly had a lot of momentum to it, as well as some pretty significant expenditures. I think that this was, last I saw, the proposition with the single most independent expenditures in the state's history. And so that is to say that rather than most of the money for Prop 50 coming solely from the Democratic Party, there were a lot of folks, including a lot of nonprofit boards, that basically sent this to pass, that basically paid for ads, that basically organized Prop 50 and its messaging to reach as many California voters as was possible. And sure enough, there was a successful result due to these efforts. Now, if you didn't know, yours truly definitely expressed a number of different reservations about Prop 50 leading into the election. You can check just the installment before this one to go ahead and see for yourself just what kind of reservations I had about the matter. But now that the measure is passed, we're going to go and check out another commentator's position on the issue. Just to place into perspective what exactly voters have passed here and what it could mean for the state of California, and also what it may not mean, even though it's kind of been sold as that to voters at this point. So for that, we go to the LA Times, and specifically to Mark Z. Barabak's article at the LA Times, where he asks very plainly, though we've passed this measure, at what cost did we pass it? What did we lose? What are we going to have to pay forward in order to see this through? And so while we won't go through the entire article, we'll definitely go through what I think is the gist of it, which is in the following few paragraphs for you. So Mark Barabak at the LA Times writes that, quote, the upshot is that even more politicians, after the passage of Prop 50, now have the luxury of picking their voters instead of the other way around. And if that doesn't bother you, maybe you're not all that big a fan of representative democracy or the will of the people. Was it necessary for Newsom, eyes fixed on the White House, to escalate the red versus blue battle? Did California have to jump in and be a part of the political race to the bottom? We won't know until November 2026. History and Trump's sagging approval ratings, especially regarding the economy, suggests Democrats are well positioned to gain at least the handful of seats needed to take control of the House, even without resorting to the machinations of Prop 50. There is, of course, no guarantee. Gerrymandering aside, a pending Supreme Court decision that could gut the Voting Rights Act might deliver Republicans well over a dozen seats, greatly increasing the odds of the GOP maintaining power. What is certain is that Prop 50 will effectively, in effect, disenfranchise millions of California Republicans and Republican-leaning voters who already feel overlooked and irrelevant to the workings of their home state, unquote. And I think Barbach put it very eloquently here, because what he's really saying is that it's quite possible that Prop 50, despite all the hype, despite all of the excitement, and despite the hope it is marketed as, it is quite possible that it's a nothing burger, including because of the pending Supreme Court decision that might hand more Republicans gerrymandering rights after all. So it's complicated, since we won't know, as he put it, until next year's midterms, where even though historically the sitting president tends to face kind of an opposition following the first 2 years of their taking the office, even though that is likely to take place for Donald Trump, especially as the economy continues to teeter. Here, California has kind of gotten ahead of the data and said, hey, if Texas can play it that way, then so can we. And voters back that. Voters backed it for a number of reasons. Of course, mostly because the majority of voters saw it as just a referendum on Trump and whether they approve of the job Trump has done or not. And here in California, where Democrats or people who vote for the Democratic Party outnumber those who vote Republicans 2-1, hey, like, of course this would pass. But it did pass along partisan lines. We can visit the registration for a moment, or the state ballot count for a moment, and see that about out of 7 million people who voted, 5 million of them, or over 5.2 million of them, voted yes, while 40%, or nearly 3 million, voted no on the initiative. And so this is really just a replica of what the 2024 presidential election looked like, when 40% of California voters voted for Donald Trump instead of for Kamala Harris at the time. And as Barbach says, hey man, like, instead of bringing Democrats and Republicans together, instead of finding a third option somewhere, instead of like going full scale tit for tat with this, maybe we could have waited and found a different way. Instead, now that this is passed, Republicans have filed a lawsuit and will be taking the matter to court, and it's going to get tricky. It's going to get really tricky, because the California Constitution does mandate that independent redistricting be the law of the land in the state of California. And sure enough, Gavin Newsom and the Democratic Party here said, hey, even with that being the case, let's go ahead and present this to the voters to see what they've got to say, and, you know, play stupid games that win stupid prizes. And it's been known to happen, not just in the state of California, but of course, I live here, and I've seen voters throw away opportunities to do better for themselves and for the greater will time and again. I'm not saying that this is exactly that altogether, because folks had legitimate reason to be scared and to be angry and to be emboldened by this measure or proposition. But now we wait and see. We wait until November of the following year to see just what may happen. But for now, at least from California to the state of New York to the state of New Hampshire, you have seen a gain for Democrats against Republican candidates, thus indicating that we are likely well on track to What the Democrats are certainly hoping is a blue wave. That is a real electoral uprising, a real electoral backlash towards the administration, especially as the economy continues to falter, especially as unemployment continues unabated, and in fact continues to grow at the state level and certainly at the national level, including since the cost of living is more expensive, more impossible to keep up with, including as you hear about increasing layoffs at various different companies. Whether you're watching this in California or in New York, you likely have heard about some mass layoff somewhere nearby. And it certainly gets you to think a little bit about what people are going to be doing heading into 2026. Not honestly, well before November. Honestly, as soon as February, as soon as tax season is through. Like, what are people going to be doing if not filing for unemployment claims? Because the layoffs are on the rise and not stopping anytime soon, since I see no alternative being put forward by either state electeds or these federal representatives, right? Today, of course, is also the 36th day of the government shutdown, the partial government shutdown, which has also led to an announcement that at least 10% of the US's airports will be reducing services. They will be scaling down because of overworked operators and because of folks who are just overwhelmed by more than a month without an actual paycheck, since Congress can't seem to come together, since Donald Trump has elected to do away with the very filibuster that the Republicans love when Democrats hold the White House, to undermine and sabotage their proposals and their legislative sessions. So we're really at a standstill, but I'm very much thinking about those folks out there who've lost their jobs this year and who may or may not have voted in this previous election, but who are definitely in need of some kind of support from those elected officials and the resources at hand. It's not promising, I have to say, but we kind of want to get into the details of that a little bit for this installment, because I want us to think about unemployment and really what it's going to entail for us through 2026, right? At this point in November of 2025, it's time for us to really start looking at the following year and to think about that comprehensively. And if we're not talking about unemployment, then I don't know what we're talking about, because as they say, it's the economy, right? If it's the economy, then let's think about how many people are excluded from the economy and economic participation in any fair way, since they have no employment or income by which to keep up. Now, with respect to that, I want to take us to this article for a moment, which notes that without the government in operation, the U.S. Labor and Commerce Departments actually can't publish data on the jobs report for September, or much less for October. And so we're in November now. We have no jobs report for either the month of September officially or the month of October, much less the month of October. And so it's concerning at a minimum and outrageous at worst that the US government, which oversees the wealthiest nation on earth, can't produce so much as a jobs report because it's on over a month of a shutdown. And therefore, I suppose no one is at the office to produce the report that people, including employers out there, need going into 2026 or before 2026, going into the close of 2025. Now, it does say, as you can see here, that monthly economic indicators from the U.S. Census Bureau would not be available in the event of a government shutdown. The department's Bureau of Economic Analysis would seize most services. It also says, though, let's see, there is another specific section that I wanted to show you. It also says that actually the BLS has suffered years of underfunding under both Republican and Democratic administrations. That situation has been worsened by mass firings, voluntary resignations, early retirements, and hiring freezes, which are part of an unprecedented campaign by the Trump administration to drastically reduce the size of government. So there you have it. The Republicans heard small government or less government, and they took that absolutely literally, but just for working people. Just for the working class, that is, because there's certainly plenty of government backing corporations and their bottom lines, including because of the passage of the Big Beautiful Bill, which made permanent Donald Trump's tax cuts for the largest corporations in 2017, from 2017. And so it was just yesterday morning that I saw some report about the top 1% adding some 700 or 900 billion to their wealth since the election of Donald Trump. Meanwhile, how are you doing if you're watching this podcast? How are the people around you doing? How many people do you know who've been laid off recently? There's way too many of them, that's for sure. And so we gotta place the numbers into perspective. Now, to that end, let's go ahead and check out the unemployment rate according to none other than that same Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is offline right now due to 36 days of the government being shut down at this point, which notes that the unemployment rate, which was last updated in August of 2025, basically, like almost 3 months ago, which notes that, hey, in California, you've got at least 5.5% or some 1.1 million people out of work. Now, that's an interesting number, and it's an interesting number because I had to take a look at that for a moment and ask just what counts as employed or unemployed, including for the BLS or the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Department of Labor. Like, what is it saying when it's saying that only 1.1 million people are unemployed? Because if you hear that and then you note that there are over 40 million people in the state of California, you may think that, 5.5% or 1.1 million people for a state so large, maybe that's not that serious. Maybe it's not that big a deal. But that's where an article like this one from Cal Matters, once again, shout out to Cal Matters for just the best data, the best storytelling on the state of California, really comes from. I'm out here in LA, and I got nothing but respect for the hometown journalists and what they're up to. But to be frank, I'm really a Californian, even more than I'm from LA, if you can believe that. And it's with that in mind that I definitely shout out or salute Cal Matters for their pivotal work on California and what is really taking place in the Golden State. Now, this report admittedly is from October 2024, just before the presidential election shifted the entire political landscape, right? So let's bear that in mind. But back then, we had, at least according to the Department of Labor or the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, California had an unemployment rate of 5.3%. That is, it was lower than what is reported for August 2025, right? But even then, oh, let me get us back to the right place. Even then, reporter Dan Walters had, like yours truly, some questions about that unemployment rate. He really wanted to break that data down. And so what he went ahead and did is he actually noted that, you know what, with the government reports as the official data for the month when it comes to employment is simply not the most accurate picture of what's really going on. He went ahead and said, you know what, let's see what's going on. So let's read a little bit of his article and find out just what is going on. While it is from 2024, remember, this is what the numbers looked like when there was more employment in California than there is right now in 2025, since the unemployment rate in September 2024 was 5.3, while in August 2025, the last time we had reporting for employment from the BLS, the number of unemployed people in California was actually 5.5%, 0.2% more than it was a little over a year ago. So Walters writes that, quote, officially, persons are counted as employed if they are working for wages as little as 1 hour per week. Unquote. Pause that for a second. That is insane. Let me read that to you just one more time. Quote, officially, persons are counted as employed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics if they're working for wages as little as 1 hour per week, unquote. Just knowing that off the bat should tell you about how the government is juicing the numbers, spiking the stats, basically reworking the actual data on the ground to tell you a story which is incredibly misleading if this is the case. If a person working for wages, just a single hour a week is counted as employed, then you have absolutely sold a lie to the people this data is going out to. And if you don't have somebody on your team working that picture out for you, you, my friend, are in for a rude awakening. But you need that. You need that. To be informed is to be forewarned. So let's continue with Walters' article. Quote, that minimalist definition makes employment statistics appear more positive than reality warrants. Although the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics releases the widely cited official unemployment rates each month, the agency also recognizes their limitations and issues other indices that paint a more accurate picture. The most detailed, dubbed U6, is defined as, quote, total unemployed, plus all persons marginally attached to the labor force, plus total employed part-time for economic reasons, as a percent of the civilian labor force, plus all persons marginally attached to the labor force, unquote. Typically, U6 rates are nearly twice as large as the official unemployment rates. Currently, the traditional unemployment rate for the nation is 4.1%, but its U6 rate is 7.7%. Through the first half of 2024, California's U6 rate was 9.6%, the highest of any state. California's high measurement implies that it has disproportionate levels of part-time workers or people who may be counted as potential workers but are not particularly interested in getting jobs. Combined with the state's declining labor force participation, its high U6 measure reveals a less than healthy employment situation and explains, at least partially, why employers find it difficult to find qualified workers even though there are more than 1 million people who are theoretically seeking jobs. But the picture is even cloudier when one overlays an even more nuanced measure advanced by the Washington-based Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity, what it calls the true rate of unemployment, or TRU. TRU calculates the proportion of, quote, functionally unemployed, unquote, members of the labor force, defined as the jobless, plus those seeking but unable to find full-time employment paying above poverty wages, pegged at $25,000 a year in 2024 dollars. While the nation's traditionally calculated unemployment rate was 4.1% in September of 2024, Ludwig pegged its true rate at 23.9%, nearly 6 times as high, and California was very close to the national rate at 23.5%. Numerous other states were worse, unquote. So, of course, on reading that, I had to go and check it out. I had to go and see the Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity's data. And sure enough, in checking that out, I thought to myself, wow, we're really in for such a cold winter in 2026, because when I think about the number of people who have told me they've been laid off, or when I think about the number of people who I know have been searching for work over the last year, I mean, it's staggering. It's more people than I can count with my two hands. And so if I know people in that condition, I'm certain that those of you out there know just as many, if not more, folks who are actually looking for work out there, but who can't find something, including that is something paying a living wage and not some wacky, like, subsistent excuse for a wage out there, of which there is so plenty, of which there's an endless supply, an endless list of, right? Now, when we go ahead and take a look then at this specific data, as it says, there's a labor force number, which describes how many people are seeking but unable to find a full-time job that is at 35 hours a week, people who are unemployed or employed in a position earning a poverty wage, conservatively pegged at less than $25,000 annually before taxes. At least in LA in 2024, that was about 28% of the labor force. That is which was either looking for work or which was part-time somewhere, but making less than, as it says here, conservatively $25,000 annually before taxes. That's huge. That's 1 out of 4 people who could have a job somewhere, who could be employed somewhere, who may be in their prime working years somewhere, who just have no way in, who have no access, but who nonetheless have to pay for their bills, have to pay their rent, have to pay for their kids' clothes so that they may go to school, and so on and so forth. Now that's the sort of data for the labor force, according to the Ludwig Institute, correct? Then there's another marker, another metric, which measures the percentage of the whole population, that is not just of the labor force, but of the whole population, anyone out there looking for work, period, in the state of California, including people who are 16 and older, but unable to find 35 plus hours a week, or is unemployed, or is employed in a position earning a poverty wage, conservatively pegged at, once again, less than $25,000 annually before taxes. When you look at LA, for example, the LA area, we're talking about 53.8%. 53.8%. That is half of the people working in the city of Los Angeles can't actually call themselves meaningfully employed, or employed in a position where they're making more than $25,000 annually before taxes with respect to their expenses, and where they're working 35 plus hours a week. That is full time. And that was in 2024, once again, when the unemployment rate, at least as of August or October 2024, was less than it was just this August 2025. right? Because in August 2025, the last time we had a report from the federal government about the number of people unemployed in the state of California, 5.5% or 1.1 million people. Again, according to their flawed and misleading metrics, were out of work. But this year, it's more people out of work, including people such as Jodea Wilson, 22 years old, in Sacramento. And once again, we salute Cal Matters for excellent reporting, just top level journalism. This article by Adam Eckelman. And it's because this article basically describes to you how Jodea at 22 was able to start college at, I believe it was Sacramento State. Yeah. And get through about a year of his education there before he actually had to drop out because of the cost of tuition, because he simply could not afford the tuition, and because he actually ended up in debt as a result of trying to make it work at Sacramento State University. It's a chilling story because it talks about the way that there are at least 500,000 people, most of them men, who are in a position just like Jodea Wilson's. That is, who are neither in school nor at work somewhere. And it's outrageous. It's heartbreaking. It's sobering. But it tells you everything you need to know about just where California is actually at, especially for its young people, especially for young workers, right? I mean, if you know of people in their 30s and their 40s, people who have been at their craft or at their jobs at essential work somewhere for some 2, if not 3 decades, who are now retiring or who have been forced out or have been laid off, if you know about them, and people like Jodea Wilson are just trying to get in, I mean, what does that road look like when at 22 years old, you're not enrolled at a school anywhere, getting a college education, and you're not making money either at Target or at McDonald's or driving Uber or whatever that may be? If this is where you're at by 22, it's a long, hard road going forward. But that's exactly what's going on for at least 500,000 people. Most of them men just like Jodea, who've got no recourse, who have no package on the way, who will not be made an exception for when it comes to state tuition at these expensive universities, and who thus have to find some other outlet. And this is huge, right? Because California, and specifically a city like Los Angeles, it's known, or it was known historically, for gang culture in particular, and the number of young men, especially black and brown young men, who resorted to gangs and an economy or some kind of identity even through gang culture specifically. And you wonder how it could be then that actually the very moment that California had more people employed than ever was in the 90s. That's according at least to Walter's article. He cites that at the very beginning, just at the top here. Yeah. As he noted, it was in the 90s, specifically in 1990, that 68% of adults had a job somewhere. And now 35 years later, we're talking about 63%. Even as the state has grown, we're talking about 63%. Even as college access was supposed to have grown, even as gang activity has decreased, even as institutions like Men's Central Jail in Los Angeles County are scheduled for closure, there's less work now in 2025 for young people like Jodea than there was in 1990. And it's only going to get more difficult. It's only going to get more difficult because, once again, those layoffs that we keep hearing about, people doing all sorts of work, people who were doing all sorts of work just 4 or 5 years ago have been out of an official title for just about that long as well, and I don't know what the recourse is other than homelessness. I don't know how Karen Bass could lift the temporary emergency or state of emergency in Los Angeles, citing more shelters, more availability for shelters when you have data like this staring at all of us right in the face, but which is captured in detail through articles like this one. The article goes on to talk about Jodea's car breaking down and him having to find a new one, and also notes that his father and his stepmother actually together make more than what FAFSA allows for a student's parents to make for him to qualify for financial aid. So, all this talk about DEI and these black and brown communities taking over and gaining too much ground at the state's institutions and through subversion, somehow, some way, of the state's resources. Even with all that, you have the reality that people like Judea are actually facing, where, hey, like through no fault of his own, he had to pay his way forward for the entirety of his education and found himself going into debt as a result, and is now just on the brink of homelessness through this very November right now, when more people are unemployed at this time than were last year, as far as we can tell. The article also talks about Will Rose in Southern California, specifically in San Pedro, and how he was working for Amazon for a time before the work just got too overwhelming. I mean, he might as well have had an ankle bracelet while he was doing that job because it was just too demanding. It weighed on him. It exhausted him. It wore him out. And he soon found himself just on the brink of homelessness, if not for basically a lifeboat. It was not easy to kind of find his way back, but Will Rose, in fact, did. And yeah, this is after, like an incredibly, incredibly challenging path just to adulthood for people like Rose, right? So if in 2024 you already had all of these men, not just black and brown men, white men, Asian men out there, Indian men, whatever you want to call it. If in 2024 you had this number of people finding themselves in isolation and without recourse, then what is it that we have for them? And not just at the national level, but here at the state level. And not just in terms of lofty statements by the governor and neat, bow-tied initiatives, but what do we have in terms of a policy to get these folks in the market, in the labor force, so that they might survive in the city of Los Angeles, in the state of California altogether? If we have nothing, then guess what? That's why people are going to Texas. That's why folks are going out to Georgia. That's why folks are going to Florida. right? And that's why they don't vote just as well. If people like Jordea and if people like Will have no options but to move on and leave this place they call home so that they can find some miserable job out there somewhere where they're making less than $25,000, then guess what? They are still just on the margins, but they're surviving. And I think that's what's going on all over the United States. I think California is one example, but I'm certain that the state of New York has had just as many layoffs and has seen its unemployment rate rise just as much as the Golden State here has. So I definitely wanted to go through this with you and basically shout out all those folks out there who have lost their jobs this year and who are wondering, who are really at a loss for just what is next for them, since without a job and while they wait on some unemployment claim, there's not much else to go. There's not much else to work with, right? So I think it's key. And I think it's key. I think it's key to see that, hey, if you got out on election day and you voted for Prop 50 and you did so because you want to resist this current state, then please know that there's a lot just right here at home, just right here in Los Angeles, that we have to come to terms with, that our elected officials have to not just say something about, but must do something about. Because if there is no alternative and we have nothing for this many people, then I don't know what 2026 really has in store for folks, right? As if government shutdowns and the end of food stamps and the end of Medi-Cal and other healthcare benefits, if that is just the new norm in the year ahead, then I expect nothing less than a lot of uproar. And I'm not talking about uproar in November. I'm talking well before November. So keep this in mind. Go ahead and let someone else that you know about this. In fact, let the city know, because it's J. T.